is it possible for an airline to disappear out of thin air?
Now, there's a theory going around on the internet. Hijacking, mechanical failure, a meteorite hitting it, pilot suicide, who knows?
So much about this flight simply doesn't add up.
239 innocent people.
This very mysterious and very suspicious cargo could be at the heart.
The first time I saw that, my honest feeling was, who planted there?
We are equally puzzled as well.
They are lying from the beginning. They are lying to the whole world.
항공 역사상 가장 큰 미스터리로 꼽히는 비행기 실종 사건을 다룬 이야기입니다.
Planes go up, planes go down. What planes don't do is just vanish off the face of the earth.
사건을 파고들었던 항공기자 제프.
So the flight was a red-eye from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. The plane was going to take off around midnight and fly through the night and arrive in Beijing around dawn. Everything was routine. There were 227 passengers and 12 crew.
370, right of takeoff. Nice.
So 41 minutes past midnight, the plane takes off. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning is when things start to get strange. The plane is about to leave Malaysian airspace. They're going to be handed over to the next set of air traffic controllers who are in Vietnam. As the plane approaches the limits of Malaysian airspace, the captain of the flight, Zahari Ahmad Shah, gets on the radio and says,
"Good night, Malaysia, 370."
And then 90 seconds later, vanishes from radar.
주변 국가들이 교신을 시도했지만 비행기는 사라져버렸죠.
On the phone with us now is the Malaysian Airlines Vice President of Operations.
The Boeing 77 seems to have vanished into thin air. Okay, the aircraft has got about 7 hours of fuel, and we suspect that by 8:30, this aircraft would have run out of fuel. At the moment, we have got no idea where this aircraft is right now.
Early in the morning of the 8th, the search and rescue have been activated. The standard operating procedures is to go to the location where we lost the aircraft on the radar screen.
쏟아지는 제보 속에서도 비행기의 잔해조차 찾을 수가 없었는데요.
Cathay Pacific pilot reported seeing large solid debris in the ocean during a flight from Hong Kong.
We do know another pilot contacted Flight 370 just before it disappeared. There was a lot of interference, static, but I heard mumbling from the other end.
239명의 가족들에겐 악몽 같은 시간이 시작됐고
I dropped the phone and ran outside screaming.
All I can remember was I was just crying.
Bah là, tout d'un coup, le monde s'arrête, quoi. Tout d'un coup, je dis, mais c'est pas possible, c'est un cauchemar, réveillez-moi.
我们就希望中国政府赶快派搜救队，因为越南人真的没有什么能力。
整个房间充满了这个各种的这个哭声、喊声。现在回想起来，那个房间我比喻成这个，突然有一个乘客的女儿，显示的是他写的是爸爸。
비행기 안에 있던 사람에게 전화가 걸려오지만
电话，但很可惜，就在他要接电话的时候，这个呼入的来电就停止了。马航跟政府去追踪这个电话能够打通的这个线索，但是2年中的答复都是相同的，再也没有能力去追索了。
정부의 대처는 실망스러웠습니다.
Brought an all-out search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370.
And we don't know anything. We're not even sure of where that plane is.
We went there. There's nothing.
So do you have any comments on the status of MH370?
제프는 전자신호가 동시에 끊긴 사실에 주목했고
Most obvious answer would be catastrophic failure. Like the plane blew up, it impacted the ocean, but the plane's debris was still not found underneath the spot where that disruption in communication occurred. The only really obvious possibility is that somebody on board the plane deliberately turned off its electronic communication signals. And if that's the case, the question is who?
이틀째 되던 날 말레이시아 정부는 충격적인 소식을 발표합니다.
Something very unexpected had been spotted by military radar. That doesn't require any kind of signals from the plane.
This aircraft made a turn back
but we are not sure whether it is the same aircraft.
Reversed course back over peninsular Malaysia, is seen doing so by Malaysian military radar, flies to the end of the zone of military radar coverage, and vanished again.
40 ships and 34 aircraft have failed to find any sign of the jetliner.
Searching east, you're searching west.
The state of confusion was so profound. It's impossible that the plane could be both of these places.
유족들은 더 이상 정부를 믿을 수 없었고.
One day you say this, the next day the reporter say that. Who to believe? What to believe?
It's still very difficult to understand why they have withheld this information, given they would have seen it when it happened in real time.
Donc là, tout de suite, la première réaction, c'est de dire, attends, ils se foutent de nous. Ils se moquent de nous.
사건이 점점 미궁 속으로 빠져들자 각국의 전문가들이 힘을 모으기 시작했죠.
I had never experienced anything like this, where people were coming together spontaneously from all around the world.
Pilots, engineers, scientists, legal experts, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, people very familiar with how the 777 flies and how the different systems work.
We, the independent group, weren't making really at this point any kind of claims, but we were just trying to figure out what was known. Because if you wanted to know about MH370, which so many people did, you weren't getting it from the Malaysian authorities. But we weren't the only group out there. There was another tribe called the Tom Nodders.
민간인들로 이루어진 톰노더는 위성 사진으로 비행기를 찾고 있었고.
And so I was handed the area pretty close to where the airplane first disappeared from radar in the South China Sea.
한 여성이 추락 지점에서 무언가를 발견하는데.
And that's when I started saying to myself, holy crap, there's a piece of debris. You know, there's the airplane. And then I started seeing more pieces. Something that looked like the fuselage. Something that looked like the tail.
일주일이 지나 정부의 발표는
Based on new satellite communication, MH370 turned back over Peninsular Malaysia before turning northwest. We are ending our operations in South China Sea.
I was like, what is going on? I already had notified TomNod that this debris existed, but I never got an acknowledgement that I tagged debris. I did everything I could to try and get someone's attention that the debris was off Vietnam in the South China Sea. But then the next thing I heard was even more confusing.
That the plane's last communication with the satellite was in one of two possible corridors.
So this is getting weirder and weirder by the day.
The aircraft could be anywhere in these two arcs.
The covering are so vast, hundreds of thousands of square miles.
인말 세트라는 위성통신 데이터 때문에 예상치 못한 추측이 이어지는데요.
Inmarsat are in the business of providing satellite communication for planes when they're beyond range of ground radar systems.
So it would send a message basically saying, "Are you still there?" And the satellite terminal responded saying yes. And these pings continued, or these messages continued for up to 6 hours after last contact. But there's nothing in the data itself to give any position information. There's no GPS coordinates, for example. All we know is how far the aircraft is away from the satellite.
The most optimistic possibility is that it landed somewhere in Central Asia, like Kazakhstan. But if the plane went south, it must have crashed in the remote ocean. There's no way that anyone could have survived.
The country's prime minister publicly confirming today what has been a widely held suspicion that the plane was deliberately flown off course.
기장이 용의자로 지목되고.
We took possession of a simulator, of a flight simulator.
곧이어 말레이시아 정부는
Inmarsat and the AAIB have concluded to this new data, flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
Your loved ones are dead because of math. Never in the history of human existence have 239 people been declared dead on the basis of mathematics alone.
也没有找到东西，也没有计算出准确的地点，而且这种计算也是史无前例的一种计算，是否进行了验证？所以前面着急隐瞒，后面赶紧想办法了结。
결론을 납득하지 못했지만 밝혀낼 수 있는 건 아무것도 없었죠.
Shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, Zaharie is flying over the South China Sea, in between two areas of air traffic control. Nobody's paying attention to him. Maybe he says to the co-pilot, "Hey, buddy, why don't you go in the back and get me something?" Zaharie locks it. Turns off all of the electronics that make the plane visible to the outside world. It vanishes from radar. For everyone else aboard the plane, everything was routine. He grabs the yoke and he pulls it into a hard left turn. He heads back towards the Malaysian peninsula. Perhaps the co-pilot realizes that he's been locked out of the cockpit, is going to have a very hard time keeping control of the plane, so starts depressurizing. But what a lot of the passengers don't realize is that the oxygen generators in these emergency masks only work for about 15 minutes, and soon the entire cabin is quiet. He turns the plane to the south, and he flies straight into the darkness. After 6 hours of flight, the engines stop running, and he starts to slide into a dive. If Zaharie took the plane, it had to be that sequence of events. It is worth pointing out that there have been a handful of cases, but there has never been a case that someone has taken 6 hours to commit mass murder-suicide.
그런데 얼마 후 또 다른 말레이시아 항공기가 격추되는 사건이 발생합니다.
Ukrainian president called the downing of a Malaysian Airlines passenger plane an act of terrorism.
It turned out that it was a Russian army unit under the command of Russia's military intelligence. Malaysian Airlines hadn't had a major accident since the 90s. And now, within the span of 4.5 months, they'd lost 2 big 777s. As I thought about the idea that maybe the Russians had caused both of these events,
14국가의 지원으로 인도양에서 잔해를 찾기 시작했고
The area they're searching is far larger than the continental United States.
A location they say satellite data points to.
I can't imagine someone I loved lost in the southern Indian Ocean in 4,000 metres of water. I mean, it's just... But it was a very, very difficult area to search. So we knew the chances were it would take a long time.
흔적을 찾지 못한 채 1년이 지나는데요.
This is what a year of grieving looks like. But with not a single trace of the plane, acceptance is a long way off.
A whole year had gone past and we were still no further ahead than we were from March 8th.
On social media, conspiracy theories about the missing plane are going viral.
theories are bouncing off the walls. Everyone's got an idea.
The totally bizarre, a meteorite hitting it.
North Korea took the airplane.
Does this mean an alien was on the plane?
And abducted everyone on board.
It gets even weirder.
1년간 기장을 조사했던 기자 플로렌스.
There was a very consistent and hostile campaign related to his private life, his mental health.
Hi everyone, this is a YouTube video.
This was a man who was doing YouTube video to help sealing your windows or fixing your air conditioning. He was certainly not an extremist.
All the crews definitely don't agree with that kind of accusation towards Captain Zaharie.
많은 사람들이 기장짓이 아닐 거라 생각했고
The biggest problem is that Inmarsat hasn't released enough detail to allow outsiders to confirm any of their analysis.
Really, all the faith has been in this data.
지속적으로 정보 공개를 요구하는데
Finally, the Malaysians did release all of the data. Inside the report was a paragraph that said, had been turned off when everything else was turned off. And then it came back to life. Why would you turn the system back on with that Inmarsat data? Maybe it had been tampered with. And I quickly learned that there is no on and off switch in the cockpit. All of this resides inside the electronics bay. The electronics bay is under an unlocked hatch under a piece of carpet at the front of the first class cabin. Effectively anybody on that plane can pull up a carpet and have control of the airplane.
한편 또 다른 정보를 입수한 프랑스인 유족.
Et j'en veux pour preuve qu'il y avait 2 AWAC américains qui surveillaient la zone au moment où l'avion disparaît. Donc ils savent où il est tombé, ils savent où il est. Les Américains sont impliqués parce que je sais que si je dis ça, les gens vont pas me croire. Je sais qu'il y a des gens qui sont là pour me détourner de la vérité. Donc c'est là où on commence à s'organiser avec les familles.
일까지 그만둔 그는 다른 유가족들과 함께 진실을 찾는 일에 매달렸습니다.
Aujourd'hui, on est là pour remettre une pétition au président. Ce qu'on a fait, c'est qu'on a porté plainte pour acte de terrorisme. Donc, à partir du moment où on porte plainte en France, il y a un juge qui est nommé, et des juges sont nommés, et des juges doivent mener une enquête. Mine de rien, je suis dans un combat, et un combat, ça vous aide à vivre. Je cherche juste à savoir, pour moi et pour tout le monde.
Guylain told me that he had been approached by a senior member of the intelligence service. When I met this source, I established for myself that he was a credible, a genuine member of the intelligence community. He was just one more voice telling me that the true story of MH370 is completely different than the official narrative.
반면 데이터를 의심하던 제프는
It seemed to me much more likely that the Russians were involved. Now remember that Russia had shot down MH17, so my prime suspect was that this same intelligence service was also involved in MH370. I looked in the passenger manifest and I saw that there were 3 ethnically Russian men on board the plane that night. One of them was sitting about 15 feet from the unlocked hatch into the electronics bay, at the front of the first class cabin.
크림반도 침공과 관련해 러시아 지지라 주장하는데
The 3 Russians aboard the plane began their operation. Someone's making a ruckus near the first class compartment. As this happens, the Russian in first class slips forward. He lifts a carpet into the electronics bay. He plugs into the computer of the plane's flight control system. The Russian agent turns the equipment on. The plane vanishes from air traffic controllers' radar screens. He now has complete control of the aircraft. And none of their communications equipment is working. The plane is in maneuver that neither one of them is commanded. The Russian agent has started to depressurize the airplane. In the minutes that follow, the captain and the co-pilot lose consciousness, and the cabin falls quiet. The Russian agent in the electronics bay has turned the plane towards the northwest and deliberately altered the Inmarsat data, and ultimately winding up over the deserts of central Kazakhstan. I knew that it sounded crazy. I knew that it was far-fetched. Even though it might torpedo my reputation, I felt like I had to go public.
다양한 매체에 출연하며 가설을 설명했지만
The independent group, which had staked its reputation on the idea that the plane went south, did not want to brook any opposition from me. They kicked me out.
대부분의 사람들이 인정하지 않았죠.
Jeff's work, in my opinion, is simply a fiction.
When we've never done it in the past before, it doesn't seem particularly credible at all.
Can disable the transponder and disable the communication systems, but it is impossible to fly the aircraft from the avionics compartment.
The fact is, if the data was right and it had told us where the plane went, how come they hadn't managed to find a single piece of it?
그런데
The piece was found on a rocky beach on the French territory in the Indian Ocean.
인도양의 섬에서 비행기 파편이 발견됩니다.
So everything was spiraling out of control for me again in my life.
C'est accepter qu'ils reviendront plus, c'est ça.
I personally don't believe MH370 crashed in South Indian Ocean. My honest feeling, who planted there? Who brought the piece there?
That the aircraft debris found on Reunion Island is indeed from MH370.
Up to that point, the only information that was available that the plane ended up in the southern Indian Ocean was really the Inmarsat data.
It was gratifying to learn that it reinforced the theories that we had been advocating.
When debris was found, it put the lights out on the spoof scenario, because here's a piece of the actual physical plane.
이 시기에 등장한 모험가 블레인이 파편을 찾기 시작했고
I talked to oceanographers. I said, well, I want to go find more debris. Where should I go? There will be debris in the Mozambique Channel on the coast of Mozambique. And we were walking along, maybe about 20 or so odd minutes into the search.
To the missing Malaysia Airlines Flight 370.
This is definitely from an airplane. The plane debris is from the Boeing 777.
This piece of debris, which we believe
섬을 옮겨 다니며 놀라운 성과를 보여주는데요.
The majority of physical evidence about MH370 comes through the hands of one guy. For Blaine, it seemed easy. And the question that I had to ask was, how is this possible? And was planted by someone working for the Russians. And it wouldn't be the first time.
제프는 대한항공 사건을 예를 들며 그가 러시아 스파이라 주장했고,
It showed he had set up this company with two business partners from Central Russia back in the early 90s. He had been present when the Soviet Union had collapsed. He could speak Russian fluently.
그를 의심하는 사람들이 또 있었는데요.
Bizarre, hein? Quelle coïncidence. Middle of nowhere, il n'y a personne. Il y a une plage où il n'y a personne.
And the first thing which I heard from an inside source within the investigation was that it was missing its ID plate. I discovered that there is only one instance where you do take off the ID plate from a plane part, and this is when a plane is dismantled.
그들 역시 발견된 파편을 수상하게 생각했죠.
And that out of these 12, there was only one serial number which was matching. This is not good enough to establish beyond doubt that this flaperon is part of MH370.
Quand on regarde ce qui nous est dit, c'est quand même un peu limite. Quand on nous dit, ouais, c'est le même type de peinture, les preuves de rapprochement entre le débris et l'avion n'étaient pas suffisantes.
하지만 블레인이 스파이란 증거는 찾을 수가 없었고,
Jeff Wise would go on Netflix and accuse me of being a Russian spy. I've been accused of being an American spy, a Russian spy, a Chinese spy. It is just patently ridiculous.
그를 믿는 유족들과 함께 계속 파편을 찾아다녔습니다.
Completely unfair how Blaine's been treated. I believe his intentions are good.
He's always been very respectful of the next of kin and what we need.
The search stretched on for a very long time. We'd been searching for over 2 years.
2년이 지났지만 모두가 납득할 만한 증거는 찾아내지 못했고, FBI는 뒤늦게 기장의 모의 비행을 발표합니다.
The FBI then did a thorough analysis of those hard drives.
It turns out that the FBI had known this information ever since they'd gotten their hands on the simulator data, but it only surfaced in the media 2 years later.
Donc il faut bien comprendre que le FBI, il a l'info avant tout le monde. Le FBI n'a jamais versé ni dans le dossier officiel de la Malaisie, ni au juge français.
Je suis assez scandalisée que sur un dossier comme ça.
Je pense que la Malaisie est un peu ce qu'on appelle en français le dindon de la farce dans cette histoire. Donc c'est les Américains qui mènent l'enquête dès le lendemain. Ce sont les Anglais qui disent où est l'avion, avec les données Inmarsat. Les Australiens cherchent.
The problem with this official narrative of the plane crashing in the Southern Indian Ocean, that everyone was expected to believe MH370 flew over the airspace of 6 different countries, namely Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and eventually Australia. Yet, not a single one of these countries have been able to produce radar images of MH370.
비행기의 이동 경로엔 군사기지도 있었는데요.
That in this day and age, we would lose a B777 in such a highly monitored region of the world.
그녀는 인말세트와 미국과의 관계를 조사하며 진실이 조작된 거라 주장했죠.
In my opinion, MH370 did not U-turn. It happened in the South China Sea, and I was not the only one to think this.
I knew that I had evidence in the South China Sea, so I feel certain that this is where MH370. The more I searched, the more debris I found. Florence contacted me. We discussed MH370. I told her, we need to remember we have the oil rig worker that said he saw a fire in the sky that night. The Cathay pilots said they saw a large debris field.
At that point, I really wondered, what could it be that placed MH370 at the heart of the greatest mystery of civil aviation? So I looked very closely at the cargo. What I found was very interesting, and that was 2.5 tons of electronics listed as walkie-talkies, radio accessories, little things.
엑스레이 검사도 없이 호위를 받은 이 화물이 중국이 빼돌리려 한 미국의 스텔스 기술이라 생각하는데요.
That's when I remember Guillain told me that 2 US AWACS planes were involved.
그녀는 미군의 통제기가 전파를 방해할 수 있다는 걸 확인합니다.
So we know that on that night, this very mysterious and very suspicious cargo, without having been scanned, and which has been delivered under escort, is loaded on MH370. The plane reaches its cruising altitude. Captain Zahari signs off with his now infamous good night.
Good night, Malaysia, 370.
And that moment, the 2 US AWACS moved into action, making it disappear from the radar. Maybe it receives an order from the AWACS to go and land somewhere nearby. When Captain Zahari received the order, I think he just continued on his planned route, going to Beijing. And as horrible as it may seem, they still need to stop the plane and its precious cargo to arrive in Beijing, either through a missile strike or a mid-air collision. MH370 met its fate.
하지만 그녀의 가설 역시 입증할 수 없었죠.
I'm just reluctant to talk about Florence or Jeff or these conspiracy advocates. These are people that don't really understand the facts and the data.
Are simply wrong. The data's the data.
There'd be debris all over the South China Sea, the Gulf of Thailand, America, Australia, England, Malaysia, Vietnam, all together to have a big conspiracy to cover up what happened to the plane. Those guys aren't friends.
I mean, I've heard every sort of theory, every sort of conspiracy theory in the face of the evidence come up with some of the most bizarre and crazy conspiracy theories.
수색이 공식적으로 종료될 때까지 비행기의 흔적은 찾을 수가 없었고.
How could such a long search not produce any result? Not even zero, nothing.
To ultimately fail, impacted on all of us.
기장이 범인이 아니라는 결론 외엔 아무것도 밝혀내지 못했습니다. 그리고 유족들은
On est toujours là, on n'a toujours pas de réponse.
여전히 진실을 찾고 있습니다.
And I don't know whether I'll ever get closure, but I will try for as long as I can to find my mother, to find out what happened.
Until I do, there will be no peace.
We deserve to know the truth. My children deserve to know.
2014년에 일어난 비행기 실종 사건을 다룬 넷플릭스 3부작 다큐멘터리인데요. 다양한 관점에서 세 가지 가설을 중심으로 그럴싸한 근거들을 제시하며 각자의 주장에 신빙성을 더하려 했지만 결국 그 어떤 주장도 모두를 설득하긴 부족해 보였습니다. 미스테리한 이 사건이 흥미진진하면서도 아직도 진실을 파헤치는 유족들의 모습에 안타까움이 더해졌던 다큐 시리즈였습니다. 시청해주셔서 감사합니다. 구독과 좋아요, 알림 설정 꼭 부탁드리겠습니다.